Now, while Democratic presidential hopeful Pete Buttigieg may have grabbed the lead in Iowa delegates over rival Bernie Sanders, there is still frustration over that disastrous Shadow Inc. app used in the caucus. Iowa Democratic Party Chair Tony Price blamed a coding issue and is now calling for an independent probe. But Shadow CEO claimed the data and collection was accurate. The Nevada State Democratic Party has also announced that they will no longer use any apps in their upcoming caucus. Joining us to discuss it is Alan Snyder, the CEO of mobile app security testing company Nowsecure. Alan, I've been dying to ask you this question. How did an app like this get through to the Iowa caucus without being thoroughly vetted?
Well, hi, Taylor. Thank you for having me today. I think that is a great question because it's clear, and we can see from what we've looked at the app, that a lot of the basic best practices that would go into building the app just were not followed. And so that is an excellent question that a lot of folks really need to answer.
What are some of those best practices that you would recommend?
Yeah, so just to give you a sense, right, our company, Nowsecure, all we do is mobile app, specifically mobile app security. So we focus on this with the largest brands in the world that folks would recognize. And when we look at it, we can see it looks like they picked a developer that had not developed many mobile apps. So that's strike one. What we can also see is complexity. There is way too much complexity in the app, both on the technology side, but also on the user interaction. And then from the security standpoint, there's just some basics, fundamental best practices that we would recommend. We've got a guide that's free, available on our website, that they didn't follow that we would expect for such an important app such as this.
Who, at the end of the day, is in charge with this? If you're working with a politician or, let's say, another corporation, someone who would come to you to talk about securing their mobile app, I'm just curious in the Iowa caucus, who at the end of the day thought this was a good idea without testing it?
Boy, do I wish I knew the answer to that. I can tell you, when we look at it, our view is it's the individuals that own the data, right, that are responsible for that data. That's who really needs to take responsibility for this. Because at the end of the day, regardless of who developed the app, it's that data that needs to be secured, it needs to be protected. That's the most valuable asset there, is that data. So it's that owner, that's who really needs to take a hard look at this process.
You know, it was interesting that the Homeland Security Department said that they had offered to test a lot of the vulnerabilities, and that offer was declined. How often are you or some of the apps that are involved in this political process working with the Homeland Security Department to make sure that your process has been vetted?
We work very closely with many government agencies. We work very closely, actually, with the government standards bodies. We're actually very involved. And actually, we just had a meeting the other day with some of the standards bodies about how we can advance mobile security and mobile app security even further from where the standards are. So it's something that we're based in, a big part of our company is in Washington, D.C., so we're very close to the standards organizations. And we think it's really important. We typically see folks they assume that mobile is the same as other apps, and that is a very bad assumption.
So I'm wondering if the Iowa Democratic Caucus had come out and said maybe they thought it was a coding issue. The app came out and said, no, it was just the amount of information to load issue. How do you solve whether that be the coding issue or a load of information issue?
Yeah, I can tell you, again, my research team has taken a look at the app, and it looked like, it was a very basic simple app. To us, there was complexity in the front end that made it difficult for people to log in and get the ability to get into and use the app. There may have been a load issue, but this is where you come back to best practices. All of that should have been tested in advance. The user should have been trained about how to log in. Modern day systems can easily handle that load. That's not the issue. It's the testing of it to make sure that when you really need it, it's ready to go.
Are there any ramifications that you can draw from this week into tech playing a larger role in the election process? Did this show that perhaps it isn't a good idea? Or, like you said, there are ways to make it secure. You just have to go that extra mile.
Well, I would say there's ways to make it both secure. Like we, Nowsecure, have worked with several vendors that are doing very secure voting apps. This one was not one of them. So we're big proponents of mobile apps. We know that it can work, and not only can it work, it can add an enormous amount of value to folks that maybe are overseas and need to vote, maybe the folks that are disabled and difficult to get out to the polling place. So we know tech can actually enrich the voting process when implemented correctly, and it can be done securely. So, and we work with several vendors that do that.
Alan Snyder of Nowsecure, thank you for joining us.